Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. It's episode 296, one of our off-season shows. I'm Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site. And Seth Cox is with me on the line, as he almost always is, from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from SB Nation. You know, it's a shame, Seth. We were just saying how much, if we only had been recording what we've been talking about for the last few minutes, it's been a blast. We're going to have to get this on tape tonight, Seth. Cardinals off-season topics. We're going to kind of get into a whole bunch of stuff. There's coaching changes, but not at the head coaching position. There's some coaching moves around the NFC West. Deshaun Watson. We're going to talk about some crazy talk of Deshaun Watson, the Cardinals. Then we'll talk free agents, just what's on the Cardinals roster. We're going to go through the free agents. And then we'll talk a little about the playoffs, what we saw from the divisional round, what was coming up on championship weekend, heading into the Super Bowl, all sorts of stuff. Seth, how has everything been, and how are you enjoying the postseason? I, for one, have loved just how fun the postseason has been overall.
Yeah, it's been a great postseason. Doing well. Kids went back to school today, finally out of homeschooling for a little bit. Hopefully that stays for the rest of the year. We'll see. The playoffs have been one of those situations where I feel like you're getting, two good games a weekend, and that makes it fun. Obviously, the Saints-Bucks game became a little anticlimactic, but that was obviously the age of one Drew Brees finally showing up and probably realistically showing that he should have retired at least last year, or if not a year ago, or 2 years ago. And it also showed how just incredible it is that Tom Brady's older than him and still performing at such just a crazy level, right? Like, that guy's insane.
Yeah, and it's sad. I thought he was like the only player left in the NFL older than. He's not even older than I am. I'm older than everyone in the NFL. I'm older. Okay, I know this is about me. I'm older than three of the coaches in the NFC West. I'm older than Cliff. I'm older than McVay. I'm older than Shanahan. Only Pete Carroll's got me beat. I'm older than everyone in the NFL, so there you go. I know no one cares about that, but people who are younger than I am are retiring from the NFL after 20-year careers, so yeah.
That's life, man. It comes at you quick.
It does. So let's go ahead and get started with the first thing we were talking about, and that's it's not head coaching changes, but the NFC West is undergoing some lower key shifts because every team in the NFC West has lost or is losing one of their top coordinator or coordinator type coaches. Seattle, they fired Brian Schottenheimer. In San Francisco, Robert Saleh, defensive coordinator for the last 4 years. Great coach. He got hired to coach the New York Jets, so he's no longer there. They will have D'Amico Ryans will take over their defensive coordinator. He will be a rookie defensive coordinator since he has not yet been a coordinator in the NFL.
Yes, that is the real same D'Amico Ryans that played in the NFL forever.
I know. Players we watched are now coaches. It's gross. It's gross. Mortality in life and things like that. And then the Rams, in what was, perhaps one of the biggest surprises of the offseason, defensive coordinator Brandon Staley, who took that Wade Phillips coached defense, made it the number one defense in the NFL. It's his only year as a coordinator. He is now he goes across the stadium offices to become the head coach of the LA Chargers. And then on the Cardinals end, as we talked about in our last show, well, David Rye's gone, but he's not a coordinator. But Tom Clements reportedly retiring. He was, without the title of offensive coordinator, he played the offensive coordinator role. He was quarterback's coach and passing game coordinator. And if you looked at the coaching tree or the coaching hierarchy on the team site, he was listed like you've got Cliff Kingsbury, and then you've got your top coordinators, and that was Vance Joseph, Jeff Rodgers, and Tom Clements. And so every single team will have at least a new offensive or defensive coordinator, whether the Cardinals actually call that guy an offensive coordinator, but they will have every single team will have at least one new guy under just below the head coach. How do you think that changes the dynamic of the division?
It's going to be interesting. I think D'Amico Ryans is probably the easiest kind of fit because, as my buddy Kyle Posey that covers the 49ers talked about, literally the first time he saw him in camp, he's like, this is going to be a DC really quick. And then, basically 2 years later, that's what happened. And he's a guy that understands what the 49ers do well and understands their defense. The one thing you look at with the 49ers defense, and this is, again, what Kyle talked about when it comes to Robert Saleh and him leaving, is that Saleh was one of the most adaptable and flexible play callers on the defense. He actually was similar to what we kind of saw with Cliff last year of, hey, I thought this was what your scheme was. And it's like, well, that's not what my personnel dictated. So we switched up schemes and this is what we do now. And that's kind of how Saleh is as a DC. I thought this year was just incredible from Saleh. You look at the just injuries and how devastating they were and what he was able to do. They haven't announced the Rams defensive coordinator yet. That's going to be interesting because Brandon Staley, kind of rejuvenated. I know that they brought in some guys like Leonard Floyd and who's the really good safety that they drafted? I can't remember his name.
Taylor Rapp?
No, the other one, but he was from Ohio State, I believe. But and they got more out of him than they expected. But when you look at it, Staley got by with a ferocious front. Obviously, Aaron Donald is the man and the best defense player on the planet, and that that helps. That always makes it a little easier. Jordan Fuller was the name I was looking for. And then they have probably one of the 2 or 3 best cornerbacks in the NFL in Jalen Ramsey. So that helps. But I mean, you look at it, they've got, Michael Brockers was playing really well this year. Sebastian Joseph played really well. The Fox kid was, on fire for them. And then their, inside linebackers
they were much better than expected. Micah Kaiser, right, when he was healthy, was like that was a linebacking core that they had major question marks, and it was strong.
And so that's the thing is a new guy going to come in and repeat that kind of success? And I don't know. That's what he did was just, I mean, it was surprising, like you said, and it was dynamic. So,
and it's going to be interesting to see because if we look at the part about Staley, which is going to be different, is because now Staley is a Vic Fangio guy. He worked with Vic Fangio, so it's that type of. Do they bring in? Do they promote? So he's sort of a Staley / Fangio guy, maybe a carryover of Wade Phillips and Vic Fangio, or do they go with a different direction? That's the part that's going to be interesting to see, because if we look at the 49ers, I think that's going to be kind of more of a seamless transition, if you will. In terms of Cardinals history, if we look back and see the transition from Todd Bowles to James Bettcher, I think it potentially could be that sort of change. The Bettcher had a very good statistical defense following Bowles. He made a name for himself, and in the news, Bettcher could find himself a new job coaching the Bears after Chuck Pagano retired. But now the one thing that the dynamic changes for me in this sense is, while there is continuity from Saleh to Ryan, just like there was from Bowles to Bettcher, you don't know how they're going to react in certain situations. And while Bettcher inherited a defense that statistically led a very good defense, we saw him be very overmatched in certain moments. Especially, the biggest moment of all was that in the NFC Championship game, when he literally did not know what to do against the Panthers that year. And so that's the one dynamic that's interesting to see, since Bettcher had not been a coach for in fact, he'd been an NFL coach for only 2-3 years, I think. And Ryan's kind of this, he hasn't been out of the NFL all that long since he was playing. And so that's the one dynamic to be interesting to see, as opposed to the Rams, who are now on their third defensive coordinator in 3 years. That's going to be interesting. While in Seattle, what are they going to do offensively? How are they going to change? The fun name that's come up is the fact that Adam Gase interviewed for that position. Oh, Adam Gase, huh?
Right. That's an interesting one. And you look at it, and it's the most interesting thing to me about the Seattle situation is that how good was their offense at the beginning of the year with the whole let Russ cook thing, right? And allegedly, obviously, it may come out eventually, but allegedly, Carroll had an issue with Brian Schottenheimer and how he called the offense. How much of it was pass heavy? I don't know. If that's true, obviously with Schneider there re-signing Schneider, you were basically saying, hey, we're going to keep running this back. So you got to go with the philosophy of the head coach, right? Like what the head coach wants to do. I guess whether or not you agree with it doesn't matter. And allegedly, that's where the Brian Schottenheimer kind of dysfunction came from, is that he looked at Russell Wilson, Tyler Lockett, and DK Metcalf and said, yeah, let's let Russ cook. And Pete Carroll said, I like to run the football a lot. Let's do that. So
it's interesting that dynamic, because now we saw how great it could be, but at the same time, we saw how quickly it began to weigh on Wilson in terms of his performance, and perhaps it was, it's going to be interesting, because the Seahawks were, if you look at now, they start out so hot, but their defense was hot garbage at the time. The Seahawks were a significantly better team late in the year, and that was when their defense tightened up and were great again, and they were getting solid contributions in the running game. And Russell Wilson didn't have to he just had to make plays when he needed to. And maybe that was better for the team overall, because if Russ is cooking the entire time and they need clutch plays late, as we saw in the middle of the season, he wasn't able to do that as well, because he was all those plays that he had in his pocket, they were getting used up all game long. Obviously, you don't want to go 1990. You don't want to go, 2018 Cardinals offensive philosophy with Mike McCoy, but you do want to protect Russ. And as even what the Cardinals learned, Cliff Kingsbury with his air raid offense, he has discovered that the Cardinals with a strong running game, that makes that passing game even more dangerous.
Yeah, and so I mean, we're gonna see how that plays out with Russ, and kind of probably what the last. I mean, obviously quarterbacks are playing at an incredibly high level for a long time, but probably the last 3 to 4 all pro type years of his career.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, at least on bringing it back to the Cardinals, since we still, we do know there's a report out that the Cardinals are expected to hire a receivers coach, Sean Jefferson, who was part of the New York Jets staff, will take over for David Rye. But we don't know what's going to happen with Tom Clement's job. We know that Cam Turner, who is an assistant quarterbacks coach, is expected to be promoted to be the quarterbacks coach. But who will be passing game coordinator and or become an offensive coordinator? And we know that Cliff Kingsbury is not going to change. He's not going to give away play calling. So this is going to be like when Bruce Arians was here. Harold Goodwin, who was a glorified offensive line coach, was offensive coordinator. Be interesting to see maybe if they promote Sean Kugler in that sense and add an offensive line coach there in that sort of dynamic. It'll be interesting to see what they do there. With the Jefferson reported hiring, the one thing that I find interesting is that there's no connection between him and the offensive staff from what I could look, while there was a connection to the defensive side because he was on the same staff under in Miami when Vance Joseph was defensive coordinator and outside linebackers coach Charlie Bolins was there. So he has a connection to the defensive side of the ball, but not to the offensive coaching staff.
Yeah, and that's going to be interesting to see where he fits in and how he fits in with the team. And obviously you don't want to give too much to the players, but how much was DeAndre Hopkins involved in this, and what does he think of this type of signing, and is this a guy that he can get along with? Because I don't think he had any issues with David Ray. He seemed to like him, actually.
Yeah. Though I think the one thing that will be, especially with NFL players, Sean Jefferson, who had an NFL career, just like with the defensive line, and kind of the respect that you automatically come in the door with as having been a player, I think that goes a long way, and I think it'll go a long way with someone like Hopkins as well. Hopkins, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with DeAndre Hopkins likes being coached, and that's something the coaches have said. He enjoys being coached. Larry Fitzgerald likes being coached. But I think will bring an extra dynamic in there in the fact that they've brought in a receivers coach who's played receiver in the NFL. David Rye, we know the story that he had. He was an investment banker, and he wanted to get in the football side of things, and he joined Cliff Kingsbury's staff in 2013, then kind of made his name for himself, position coach for Green Bay. But this is a different dynamic. So this is like when the Cardinals hired, say, Brenston Buckner, who had a good NFL career. He comes in with a cachet of respect already for the players because they know, oh, yeah, he's done this already.
Correct. And he's respected. I mean, he's been coaching since 2006, but a receivers coach since 2007. And he's coached some guys. I mean, Calvin Johnson. He had Golden Tate. No, he didn't have Golden Tate. He had who was the other really good guy there? I can't remember now off the top of my head. But and then they had, he was with Miami, and he helped develop Devontae Parker finally, right? Like, and you look at a guy like Andy Isabella, and I'm not saying it'll work, but you look at a guy like Andy Isabella, and you see a guy that probably needs a mentor and somebody that can take him under his wing and help out. So,
coming next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the web. Let's come back and talk a little more about some of the offseason stuff. So, Deshaun Watson, trade rumors. Let's talk about the possibility. We don't really think it, but hypothetical. Deshaun Watson to the Cardinals? That's coming next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the web. Now, I want to make this very clear. We are not necessarily advocating this idea. But as a hypothetical, as a talking point for us talking heads here on the internet and writing about it, Deshaun Watson is clearly unhappy in Houston. Many believe that he has played his final down for the Texans. He is or is not necessarily on the trading block. And he's one of the best young quarterbacks in football. Despite an awful season for the Texans, you cannot put any of that on exactly how Deshaun Watson played this last season. So, Vegas, as what Vegas does, odds makers have odds for teams to land them. Now, the Cardinals are one of the longest shots to land Deshaun Watson, and for good reason. They have a young franchise quarterback in Kyler Murray. Teams like the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes, and the Packers with Aaron Rodgers, and the Bills with Josh Allen, and the Ravens with Lamar Jackson. Those are the teams with the longest odds. That said, let's put this hypothetical out there. Would you be willing to trade Kyler Murray and draft capital to acquire Deshaun Watson to get the quarterback now that we believe Kyler Murray can be, at least in the years to come?
I wouldn't, and that's not a shot at Watson. I think he's, one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the NFL. It's more the idea that I think with what you have, trading more capital could cause issues. And so, like, you're giving away Murray, who's an ascending star, to get Watson. So let's say it's a +1 on that. So you've got a 9-win team now. So say, you win 9 games instead of 8. You also are giving away probably at least a first-round pick this year. And then you're probably giving away something else next year. You're also now, you and I talked about it off the air, but you're also now exorbitantly over the cap in terms of being able to make other moves. And so I think when you just kind of boil it down if you could just get the player without the contract, or if it was just a player for player swap, I think you probably would, because of Watson's age and what he's shown already as a passer, do it. I think with the addition of draft picks, salary, and all of that, it just seems to be something that wouldn't make sense.
Obviously. Now, I can see the main thing, my argument against making this trade is because if you think that Kyler Murray's soon going to hit that, so if you think that Kyler Murray's ceiling isn't even quite, or even just is what Watson is now, here's the thing. The salary cap, as you mentioned, Kyler Murray still on the rookie deal. Watson, who now has a big extension, getting paid, big quarterback money. That now limits what you can do around him. And as we already know, the talent around the quarterback position is still a touch deficient in terms of what we want, what we think, or what we should expect a second or third year quarterback to be able to elevate his team to. He's not Patrick Mahomes, at least not yet. Watson might be able to elevate the talent around him, but then you are severely limiting the talent you can put around him. We're going to end up with a situation like in Houston where you have to tear down some stuff, and even though I could see this if you do it, if you think that the two are equal in terms of ceiling, and you think that window to win a title is in the next 2-3 years, Watson probably gives you a better chance to win a title in 2021, 2022 than Kyler Murray, simply because of the experience factor, and I think some of the fits. Like, I'm not saying that the fact that Watson can do many of the things that Murray can and does not have the heightness, the height issue. There's no drawbacks to that, and so I could see, yes, that might be worth a trade if they feel that their window for a championship is now. But no. And plus, it's just a dumb idea. You have a young franchise quarterback. Why would you trade it for a different franchise quarterback? That's weird. It's different than it's good different from going from Josh Rosen to Kyler Murray, because Josh Rosen didn't show you that many thought that he could be, but he didn't really show anything that he was going to be a star. Kyler Murray has shown through 2 seasons he's undoubtedly going to be a star.
Well, and I think one other thing about it that, you kind of just have to remember, and, this is the unfortunate part. The Cardinals are not the Steelers. They're not the Eagles. They're not all, these other teams that have a history of success. So what reason would Watson want to be traded to here for? Allegedly his preferred destination right now is Miami. So we'll see how that works out for him. But, right now, I just, like you said, if you are the Steelers or, maybe the Dolphins, where you've got a lot of pieces in place, but, as we'll discuss shortly, the Cardinals are missing a lot of pieces still.
Yes, they are. So as fun as that is, I know when I wrote the piece about the odds, I put in there that it isn't completely crazy to trade Murray. It's crazy, not bonkers. It's okay. It's not trading DeAndre Hopkins to the Cardinals for David Johnson, the 2nd-round pick, crazy. But it's a little too crazy. That said, the Cardinals were considered one of the long shots. They have the longest odds, one of the longest odds to do it. So it's not happening, but it does provide us with a little bit of off-season topic, off-season content to discuss a hypothetical that never is going to happen, because Kyler is Cliff's guy, Cliff's still Keim's guy, and Keim is still Bidwill's guy. So as far as we know, this is going to roll on for at least another year or two, I'm sure. Coming up next on the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the way. Let's talk about the free agents the Cardinals have, and we're going to talk about, there's 33, from what I counted, 33 free agents that the Cardinals are scheduled to have. We'll talk offense first, then defense. On the offensive side of the ball, who are the free agents that the Cardinals should re-sign, should let walk, and who are the toss-ups? That's coming next on Rise of C-Red. We're back on the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best of our Cardinals talk on the web. We're going to talk Cardinals free agents. The Cardinals have, almost 3 dozen players set to become free agents, whether it is unrestricted, restricted, and or the exclusive rights. The exclusive rights, guys, I think there was only one, and it's Kylie Fitz on the defensive side of the ball. But let's talk about the offensive free agents, because we've got a few names on there that are, there's not a ton, but still a few worth mentioning. Do you keep them? Do you re-sign them? Do you let them go? And is it really a toss-up? So let's start with that. Number one on our list as we go at the quarterback position, you've got Brett Hundley, a healthy scratch for 16 games. Yet 2019, he proved to be a capable backup. Resign, let walk, or kind of a toss-up?
I let walk. I mean, you look at the quarterback position as is. I know fans weren't enthralled with what Streveler did in his, lone appearance, but I thought he fared well. And, the reality is the Cardinals are cash poor right now. So signing a guy to a, $3, $4, $5 million deal, while it may not sound like a lot, it could be signed, that could be used on a guy that, goes out and plays.
And he actually plays? Is active? Yeah, I know. So, yeah, I let him walk, obviously. Now, it's true. We saw what he did in 2019. However, here's the part that bothers me a little bit. Not about Hundley itself, but Cliff Kingsbury, a guy known for working with quarterbacks, and had seen Hundley. So either this. Hundley either took a clear step backwards in his preparation and play in practice. 2, Chris Streveler just was that much better or that much of a match. Or 3, Cliff Kingsbury doesn't know what he's doing with quarterbacks, which, according to what he was hired to do, was to be a guy that develops quarterbacks. He said Chris Streveler was definitely the backup. He was impressed with how he practiced, impressed with how he prepared. I don't know if there's anything else to the Hundley thing. I understand not cutting him. His contract was almost fully guaranteed. And granted, it was, I think he counted about a little under $900,000 against the cap, but it was almost fully guaranteed, so it was still worth having him in the locker room, since by all accounts he was solid in the locker room as a teammate. But I mean, if Chris Streveler's beating you out as the backup, and Streveler had never been in the NFL at all, it less sounds like they have their backup quarterback. So, Brett, it's great to bring you back to Arizona, but time to move on. I hope you can find another job, because, heaven knows, Matt Barkley's still a quarterback in the NFL, so I'm sure you could find a job somewhere.
Exactly.
Kenyon Drake. This one is interesting. Kenyon Drake, their leading rusher, wasn't the dynamic player that he was in 2019. Some would say he was ineffective. I would say he was mostly effective. He came awful close to 1,000 yards. We thought entering the year he could have been an 1,100, 1,200 yard rusher, so it was disappointing in that fact. That said, when he rushed for 60 yards or more, the Cardinals went 6-2. And when that didn't happen, obviously, they only won 2 games. Do you bring back? Is he a re-sign guy? Is he a let-walk guy? Or is he one of those toss-ups?
I let him walk. I just think that the $7 to $9 million a year is just too much for what he is as a runner and what the Cardinals need from a running back.
For me, obviously, if he's willing to take something less than the $8.5 million that he got this year, I'd consider it. It just kind of depends. Do you think Chase Edmonds is ready to take the next step and he could be the leader? Or do you bring in... Is this a position that you can piecemeal from year to year until you find a true young back that you can ride for 3-4 years? For me, it's a toss-up because If the price is right, you can bring him back, and you at least know what you have, and at least the ceiling of what he can be. If last year is the floor and 2019 is the ceiling, hey, that's good production. But can you get someone less expensive that's equally effective? You might be able to do that with some names that are out there. So for me, he's a toss-up, and it depends on what market he has in free agency, and then what the market is for other running backs.
Yeah, and that's my big thing. I wouldn't pay a running back.
This year it made sense because it basically was the same amount of money that you had committed to David Johnson. So it was a wash. Probably don't want to do that again, though. DJ Foster, special teams ace, really didn't spend a whole lot of time actually on the 53-man roster until late in the year. He was a practice squad elevation, standard a couple of times, several times as a COVID guy, but clearly a guy the Cardinals trusted when it came to special teams. He was a core special teams player. He's unrestricted this year. Resign, let him walk, toss up.
He's one of those cheap kind of guys that just helps out where needed. I think he'd be fine to resign because it's not going to be too expensive.
He's probably going to be a league minimum guy. So here's the thing that with Foster, and it's not necessarily because of him. The Cardinals special teams unit's going to be obliterated in free agency unless they bring some guys back. If you look at the core special teams unit from last season, both their kickers, free agents, their punters, a free agent, Trent Sherfield, Dennis Gardeck, Zeke Turner, Darrell Daniels, DJ Foster, Tanner Vallejo, all of whom were core special teams players who had most of their special teams tackles, big in coverage. They're all free agents, whether they're restricted or not. You'd hope not to have that much turnover. If you bring back some of those guys, bringing Foster back is kind of a toss-up, because if all he does is special teams, that's nice. If you can get him on a league minimum, that's nice. Considering he's home here in Arizona, I don't know how much interest he's going to get around the league other than a league minimum, and I think it's kind of nice to be here at home. And he can be on the practice squad, especially the expanded practice squad continues to be a thing in 2021. It's kind of a neat thing. Ooh, Larry Fitzgerald. As we come up to the next unrestricted free agent on our list, and that would be Larry Fitzgerald. Now, honestly, this isn't our call. It never is. It's about whether Fitz wants to come back or not. The difference is 11.75 million. If he wants to come back and that's his asking price and he wants to play, you have to do it, because you got to. Unless he's saying, I'll come back for this much or I'll retire. That's the question. As much as I want to say I want to see Larry Fitzgerald back again, because he is that comforting player, the face, that he's so classy, he does a lot. He wasn't healthy down the stretch last year. He had the worst statistical season of his career. I don't think he's going to return. I think he retires. Everything is lining up in that way. But I kind of want him back.
Yeah, you'd like to see him go out with a better story, at least getting a playoff run one more time, but it's tough. And like you said, I don't know how much this is a call for even Steve Keim or Cliff Kingsbury as much as it is, for Michael Bidwill and what he wants for the team.
It's true. Keim has said jokingly, and I think it's not so jokingly, that the negotiations, that's between Fitz and Mr. Bidwill himself, and Mr. Bidwill now being Michael Bidwill. I think that's completely out of Keim's hands, which is kind of a struggle. So next up in the receiving room is Trent Sherfield, core special teams player, but he's a restricted free agent. Interesting, because that 2018 undrafted class of Sherfield, Turner, and Gardeck now are all up for restricted free agency. to use a tender is not cheap. It's going to be between 2.2, 2.4 million next year if you use the restricted, if you use one of the tenders. For a guy that is a special teams player number one who can do a few nice things on offense, this is the tricky part for me. Do you project him to have a greater role on offense than he did this year? If so, he might be worth the re-signing. The problem is, if you're going to increase his role on offense, are you going to decrease his role in special teams? And if that's the case, is that actually better for the team?
Yeah, and that's my question, is that I don't think he's shown enough that you can sign him as a receiver, so he ends up being a, like you said, a core special teamer, and that's, I think, more important than anything else. If he can come back at a realistic rate, I think it makes sense, but it's just, it's going to be a lot.
What about Dan Arnold? Now, some cap sites are saying he's restricted. Darren Urban for azcardinals.com says he's unrestricted. If you look at the roster, it shows that he's a fourth-year veteran, which would make him unrestricted, even though last year he was not restricted. Do you re-sign Arnold, or do you try to go after a more known commodity?
I was just looking at the tight end room, and it's awful. So, yeah, I think so. I think you go and sign him because you just, you need it. You need the bodies in the room, and you need the depth at the position. And if you re-sign Arnold, he's only the third guy in the room heading into the offseason. He's probably one of only two guys that'll be on the roster next year.
Here's the thing for me that I like is that you can tell by the way the team talks about Arnold, the way his teammates talked about it, the way Cliff Kingsbury talked about him, how they want him to grow into that role. They view him they viewed him as not to be a breakout star this last year, but they believe he has really great potential. And I don't think there was anything about the 2020 season other than the false starts that would lead us to disbelieve in that potential. He could have come up with a couple of bigger catches down the stretch, but in terms of production, he was that between of what you and I talked about him for leading into the season, we pegged it. He had 31 catches for over 400 yards, and that was going to be about tapped out. He did about as much as you could expect any tight end in this offense to produce. And so if you still view him that way, he is, while a little less known commodity, I don't know if you're going to get much more production from the position because of how the offense is run by bringing in a bigger name who costs more money. I think with Arnold, I don't think you're going to have to pay him big time tight end money. You probably can get him in that, if you get him maybe 2 years 6 or 3 million 10, 3 years and 10. And that's kind of the sweet spot because you get for the next 3 years, he could develop into a very nice player.
Right, and he'll continue to grow in an offense that he's, shown a keen ability for.
Darrell Daniels and Seth DeValve. Yes, that's a player. He was on the roster late in the season. Both tight ends, both unrestricted free agents. Daniels, he was okay. He was all right. DeValve don't know anything about, but both of those guys scream just a guy. You can pretty much bring anyone else in to do the job that they did. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and I think that's how they have to look at it.
Kelvin Beachum, offensive, he was their starting right tackle. Ended up being one of the most important signings that they made in the offseason, considering Marcus Gilbert decided to opt out of the season. Yes, they drafted Josh Jones, but they never viewed Josh Jones as a rookie, as a guy that was going to start as a rookie. So it allowed Justin Murray to be a backup to get reps at guard because as they extended him, they've clearly viewed him as a future on their line. Beachum, as much as I liked him, I think I let walk. Not because of him or his play. They seem like in the natural progression of things, Josh Jones should be the starting next year. And then Marcus Gilbert comes back, ideally. And if Gilbert is healthy, you have someone who's at least as good as Beachum at that position.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I don't bring back Beachum unless it's kind of late in the game, kind of like it was this year, and he's still looking for a job, and you've got an injury or something like that creeps up.
Max Garcia, he is a guy who has connections to Sean Kugler. He was their main trusted interior backup at the end of last year. You see a guy you bring back?
Yeah, I think you have to. Just for the fact that you don't really have a ton of depth if you're going to slide Justin Murray into that starting role, because now, we're letting go. We're not bringing back Beachum. We're potentially moving on from Garcia. Your depth takes a big hit, and obviously they're probably not going to bring back J.R. Sweezy. So I would say yes, because Garcia gives you a veteran kind of presence on that, in that depth chart that is so vital for the offense.
Yeah, and the only reason why I say it, because he's vet minimum, he's going to be he's going to make $1 million next year, and his cap hit will be about $900,000. I think is how it'll end up being. Not a bad guy to have. If you end up, he's the type of guy you sign to a non-guaranteed contract unless he draws interest anywhere else. And then if you have a young guy who beats him out, then you're okay with that. J.R. Sweezy, he's the last on the offensive side of the ball. I think we can both agree this is a let walk. He was solid in 2019. He clearly declined in 2020, and they obviously believe that Justin Murray is the guy moving forward. So as solid an addition he was 2 seasons ago, it's time to move on.
Yeah, and I would agree with that.
Coming next on the Rise FC Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's come back and talk the defensive free agents. That's coming on next on Rise FC Red. Back on the Rise FC Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. We now move on to the defensive side of the ball, where the Cardinals have a number of free agents. Beginning on the defensive line, where we have a few guys. Now, one of the guys I had on here was Josh Morrow. We're going to skip him because the Cardinals waived him. So they clearly didn't even want to keep him on the roster until free agency, and maybe, just maybe, that was because they wanted to give him the opportunity to get signed by some other team into the playoffs. I don't know, but his time is over with the Cardinals. But let's look at Angelo Blackson, a waiver claim that was surprising, who ended up having a surprisingly solid season. A little more production in terms of pass rushing, in terms of the actual stats, than he had in previous seasons with the Texans. He's a guy I'd kind of like to see back. I know the Cardinals have a very young core. You've got Zach Allen, you've got Lecky Fotu, you've got Rashard Lawrence. So you've got some guys there on the defensive line that you like. But Blackson gives you a little more juice in terms of veteran leadership. And I don't think he's going to cost a lot. So I think he becomes a cost-effective rotational guy.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think he's a guy you bring back. Like you said, I think the biggest thing is that the youth at the position, they can use a veteran kind of mentor type there and kind of go from there.
The next guy, Domata Peko, signed late in the year. I think the last 2 years we thought he would be a great fit for the Cardinals. He ended up finally joining late last year. He hits unrestricted free agency. I believe he'll be 35. For me, he is a toss-up because I want to see what you can get as a veteran nose tackle before I bring him back. So maybe a training camp edition. But if you don't land a veteran nose tackle, I don't know if I'm ready to decide that Lecky Foto and Rashard Lawrence are ready to be the guys at nose tackle. So
Yeah,
he'd be a good guy to have.
Yeah, I look at him similar to Beachum. They're your training camp right before the regular season, a couple games into the regular season if the injury, kind of shows up.
Corey Peters, he's gonna be coming off a bad knee injury. I think I know it's not as devastating for defensive linemen as it is for running back. I believe he had the same surgery that running back Ryan Williams had a long time ago. Some of you long timers remember Ryan Williams, the running back, had the patellar tendon tear, and he never was the same after that. Corey Peters is an unrestricted free agent. He's young enough still and productive enough that you could add him to a 1 or 2 year deal. He is so important to this team, but at the same time, that one's tough. He's a toss-up for me. I lean to re-signing him, probably to a 1 year deal. And I know we could probably reach out to his agent to find out what the warmth is on the chances of that. But based on what Corey Peters said on his last Zoom conference, that it is what it is. It's a business. I don't think he's super optimistic about his return. I think it's a A.Q. Shipley type of situation. They love what he's done, and they still hope the best for him. But I think because of the youth, they're probably willing to move on, as much as I'd like to have him on for 1 more year.
Yeah, and I think he's still on, and this isn't a shot at Corey, so I think, unfortunately, he's still their best defensive lineman. And so, that's on, those on the other guys. It's not Corey's fault, but, I'm kind of, I'd like to see him back because, again, kind of like Angelo Blackson, I think you need that veteran depth and a guy in the room. But I understand if he doesn't come back.
We move on to the outside backers, and the Cardinals have technically four players at that position that are free agents. The first of which we'll bring up is Dennis Gardeck, the 7-sack and 93 defensive snaps wonder who tore his ACL at the end of the year. He's set to be a restricted free agent, which means he's probably not going to be ready to do anything until mid-season. I want him back, but I don't know if and maybe he does. It doesn't require the tender, but that sort of pass rushing production will get some attention. So maybe you have to tender him. The problem being the lack of contributions until mid-season.
Yeah, and that's tough. But I mean, you look at it. Who's going to sign him?
Right. And, $2 million, 2 years, $5 million. I think I'd do it. I think I'd give him 2 years to allow to, because he's still a dynamic special teams player. The effort with which he played on defense, it really opened eyes. And so, say he can show he can do that on a more full-time basis. Okay, that might be worth it. And if you get him for more than just the 1 year on the restricted free agent tender. If you give him 2 years, $4 million, 2 year, $5 million, so you give him the 2 year security, maybe you pull that off.
Yeah, and I'd be fine with that and agree with that.
Marcus Golden. Some of their most important free agents happen to be at this position. Obviously, you've got Chandler Jones under contract. You've got Devon Kennard under contract. You can move on from Kennard and save some money against the cap. I wouldn't say, like we talked about on our last show, that it's necessarily a position of need, but you could go in a different direction. Marcus Golden would love to be back. he was fairly solid down the stretch. I don't know what sort of interest he's going to get. If he's willing, I would love to have him as a number 3 outside backer, pass rusher. But they clearly liked him as a starter. I think I like him more in the role of the rotational guy. And if you can get him, but I don't know what he's going to be wanting in the market, because he got overlooked in the market last year after a 10-sack season, and he only got, $4.75 million. He was glad to be back here. He loves it here. And so that's the plus. I want him back, but there's also other moving parts at the position for me.
Yeah, that's the hard part, is that it's a position right now that's been a bit of a pain for the Cardinals, and trying to figure out what they do and who they do it with is tough. He probably is going to want more than he's going to get.
And that's okay. That happens in the NFL a lot. The next guy is Isaiah Irving. He played like 4 snaps for him before he suffered a neck injury that ended his year. I'm not even going to worry about him because I'd never heard of him before. And he was clearly a special teams addition when there is injury. So I hope his career gets on track and he can continue to play, but he's not even just a guy for me.
Correct. And I would agree with that sentiment.
Oh, Hassan Reddick. This is the one of the big questions. What do you do with Hassan Reddick? Because after the 12.5 sacks, the 7.5 to close out the season, he's got the production and the age and the athleticism to pick up a nice long-term deal. Yet, with his size, he only fits on any defense with a 3-4 set. And if we just look to a year ago when Marcus Golden didn't land a long-term deal, what do you do with Reddick? You've got do you move on from Kennard and sign Reddick? Do you cut Chandler Jones to save a lot of cash and then throw money at Reddick, believing in his next level step and becoming at least having the next 2-3 years of being a top pass rusher, James Harrison type style in terms of build and athleticism? What would you do with him?
I think the easiest thing to do, and it's still difficult, would be to franchise him, or even transition tag him, and see if anybody's willing to negotiate. And I don't think anybody's going to be. And what that does for you is that buys you a season when Chandler Jones's contract is up. It also buys you hey, prove it for one more year for us. Show us you can do it. We'll pay you the, $15 million this year. It's quite a bit, but we'll pay it. And if he goes out and balls, then you replace Jones's contract with Reddick's contract. If he goes out and lays an egg, then you're kind of in the same position you are with the cornerbacks, right?
Yes. The one thing I think you could do here, if you really believe, you legitimately believe he can continue to do what he's done. Now, he did have that 5-game stretch where he didn't have any sacks, but he did have 5 sacks in the first 7 games. Then he went 0 for the next 5, and then he had 7.5 in the last 4. So, and you look at it, there's production there that's good, and he still was even learning. I could think, if I'm the Cardinals, one thing that you could do is even extend Chandler Jones out another year. That will lower his cap hit. You see if you can get Reddick on a 3. You cut Kennard, you sign Reddick to a Kennard-like deal, and then you re-sign Golden to be your number 3. Jones, Reddick, Golden. I like that. if you can make the numbers work right. It might require extending out Jones another year or two, which honestly might not be a bad thing, because you extend him out an extra year or two if he's going to continue to be a top pass rusher. You get Reddick on the upside of his career, and then you get Golden, who is starting caliber at high-end backup money, to say. I think that might not be a bad thing, and I think Vance Joseph would be able to do a lot with that.
Yeah, and I think that would be that's a good plan laid out, because it gives you a number of options, and it also gives you some get out of jail cards with guys that you sometimes need them with, especially a guy like Chandler Jones. Not to say Jones won't come back and be a dynamic player, but you're paying him to be one of the top 5 pass rushers in the NFL. If he comes back and he's not even a top 25 pass rusher in the NFL, that makes it difficult. Whereas, if you have 3 guys in the fold, it's a little bit easier.
Devondre Campbell, inside backer, signed on a 1-year deal last year. Looked like he was going to be great. His production tailed off a little bit, had some injuries, and plus they've got Isaiah Simmons. I'm not sure what to do about Devondre Campbell here, except for this possibility. Could they and should they move on from Jordan Hicks and re-sign Campbell to play Hicks' position and pair him with Isaiah Simmons? Otherwise, I think he's a guy I lean towards letting go.
Yeah, I mean, I'd lean towards letting him go as well, except for your scenario. I think if you're able to move on from Hicks, I would do it, but you better be pretty darn sure you're going to have Campbell, because you've invested a ton into that position group and it's still really bad. And so, you not only need Simmons to pan out, but you need to make the right call in this decision. And I'm not going to try to fake that I would know what to do in this situation, because, like you said, we thought, oh, well, this is easy. Cut Hicks. If you would ask me in Game 5, cut Hicks, bring back Devondre Campbell on a 3-year, $30 million deal or $20 million, $25 million deal, and then it all kind of spiraled from there.
and so it'll be interesting to see with that. The one thing that we were talking about before the show is the one downside to the situation. Obviously, Isaiah Simmons, for Cardinals fans, was a disappointing year for him. Not necessarily because he played badly. He looked like a rookie sometimes made some really nice plays, but he only played a third of the defensive snaps this year. However, as he was just named part of the PFW, the Pro Football Writers of America, their all-rookie team. Now, granted, an all-rookie team is hard to fill because you've got to fill it with, 27 rookies. So you're going to get some that weren't as productive. But at the inside backer position, inside and middle linebacker, you had Kenneth Murray for the Chargers, Patrick Queen for the Ravens, and Isaiah Simmons. His year wasn't as bad or as disappointing statistically as one might think, because if you look at the production from those other 2 players, Kenneth Murray played 93% of the Chargers' defensive snaps, had over 100 tackles, and that was about it. He had 1 sack. He didn't have a ton of tackles for loss. He didn't really do anything in terms of forcing fumbles or picking. So in terms of playmaking, other than making tackles, that's not to downplay that. Patrick Queen, also over 100 tackles, 3 sacks, multiple forced fumbles, had an interception. He played 80% of the snaps. Simmons played 34% of the defensive snaps, had over 50 tackles, had 2 sacks, had an interception, had a forced fumble, had a fumble recovery. So he filled the stat sheet in a very limited role. If we doubled his playing time and his production doubled, he would at about 70% of the defensive snaps and still playing significantly less than the other two rookies, would have been equal or better to even Patrick Queen. So there's it's an interesting thing, and the thing we were talking about before the show as well is if Simmons is going to be full-time inside backer, you can let Campbell walk. The problem that I see a little bit, if Simmons is going to do what he did last season at late in the year, and that's move around a little bit, you need another starting caliber linebacker. I don't know if that means you bring back Campbell on a similar contract, or if you need a young player, if you need an Evan Weaver, who was on the practice squad all season, becomes the guy that's your third backer, or like Zeke Turner, you bring him back because he has the run and hit mentality of a safety, and he has the movement skills more like a defensive back, but not quite good enough to be a defensive back. That's the only thing here that I question is, if you let Campbell go, you still need a third inside backer if Simmons is going to move around to be on the field with Simmons.
Yeah, and that makes it, it makes it a difficult decision. I would lean towards what you said. If you can cut hits and bring back Campbell, and then you're able to, even if it's draft a guy, on day 2 or 3 that kind of fills that role, I think that's the way to go.
I think that'd be fantastic if you can do that. I know what in terms of contemporary term, the optics of cutting a guy like Hicks. That's tough to do with the locker room because he's a defensive captain. He still has 2 years left on his deal. That never goes well. That's never something that looks good among players, is when you cut a guy who's producing with multiple years left in his deal. That doesn't look good. That said, Hicks definitely had some issues in coverage. Campbell did too, but Campbell was better than Hicks in coverage. I think Campbell can do the things in terms of the run game that Hicks could do, and as long as he is smart enough to make the calls, then I think by going Campbell-Simmons, you then have upgraded there, other than having to take a slight hit in morale because you let go of Hicks. That's a real thing in locker rooms for video game players. It doesn't matter. You just cut guys. In fantasy football, you just cut. But for us, it doesn't matter. For the players, it does. Zeke Turner is next. He's restricted, key special teams guy. Even got an All-Pro vote or 2 for special teams. He blocked a kick. He blocked a couple of kicks. He blocked a kick. He had did he block 2 kicks? He had the 4th down fake punt reception, and he showed, at least like in the training camp part of things, he showed big strides in the linebacker position. I don't know if you can tender him, but he's a guy I want back.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy you'd like to have back, and keep on the roster. Like you said, from a special team standpoint, more than anything, he's such an integral part of this team. He along with Gardeck are those kind of guys that you need on your team. They're the dogs on the team that really, get the physicality going. I think losing him would be a tough blow all around.
Tanner Vallejo, unrestricted. He's a guy that they cut, they bring back. He brings back again. He finds a role on special teams, gets a little play late in the year, and when he ends up on the field defensively, he always seems to be productive. But in a limited amount of time that he's played in the NFL and had some extended playing time, he's not been super durable, at least on the defensive side of the ball. He's a guy I'd like to. He's unrestricted. He's a guy like DJ Foster. I'm okay with bringing him back. It's going to be a minimum deal, I imagine. Bring him back.
Yeah, and that's how I feel. I mean, and he's also a guy that I feel like if you don't bring back now, you probably get him in camp, like you said.
Yeah.
If something happens, or if a guy like um, Ezekiel Turner or Dennis, or you bring him back and then you release him when, and if Gardeck comes back and healthy in terms of um, if Vallejo's not giving you any snaps at inside linebacker and instead it's just a special teams guy.
So Vallejo is also a guy that I I wouldn't be completely against him being that third backer. If Campbell doesn't come back or they move on from Hicks, I think I'm comfortable with Vallejo with a handful of defensive snaps because he plays with a special teams mentality, plays hard, and he's been super productive anytime that he's played defense. And so I could even roll with him as that third backer getting playing time on defense. So another reason you bring him back, especially if you get him back on a minimum deal, he plays some on defense, and that's a super good value.
Yeah.
The cornerbacks. Now we've got a quartet of veteran cornerbacks that you have to look at. The cornerbacks who are unrestricted are Jonathan Joseph, who got a little bit of playing time, Drake Kirkpatrick, Kevin Peterson, and Patrick Peterson. Let's talk Patrick first. What do you do with Patrick?
It's tough right now because their cornerback room's so bad. To say, oh well, you just move on is negligent because you just don't have anybody. I mean, you literally have as the two corners on your roster right now,
And one is a guy named Picasso. So
yeah, but you have Byron Murphy and Robert Alford, and then you have guys that you signed to future deals.
Oh, and Robert Alford. Here's the thing with Alford. He's been with the team for 2 years, hasn't played it down. I think everyone sees him as he's a definitely guy that's going to be cut. You said, I can't remember you said on the air or on the show, or if it was more of a thing that we talked about offline, is Alfred's the perfect guy to cut and or just not cut and do what they did with Mikey Potty. Now, granted, this is already his last year of the deal, and basically just cut his salary, but he's already here. He likes it here. He knows the system. You pay him veteran minimum because he's already been paid a lot for doing rehab, and then you can't you can't count on him to be a starter, but on the high end could be your starter. But that said, Patrick Peterson, unless they have a plan, you gotta re-sign him because he's still their best cornerback. Even though he's not elite anymore, he's still pretty good most of the time. So unless you've got a plan in place to bring in a better one, he's a guy that wants to be back. Maybe it's a 2-year, $25 million deal. You do the Richard Sherman, like how Richard Sherman bet on himself, that type of deal. I'm interested to see, but I would, unless they've got plans for a deal for a Marshawn Lattimore, who's going to hit his 5th year and then going to need an extension. Bring back Patrick. I'm Drake Kirkpatrick, Jonathan Joseph. I'm a toss-up on that one because I think there are a number of veteran cornerbacks who could do exactly what they can do. Now, granted, they have connections with Vance Joseph, so I wouldn't be surprised to see one of them back next year. And Kevin Peterson, he can go. It's fine. I think you can find the production.
Yeah. You can find a dime back pretty easily. He never kind of stepped up to what we had hoped he would become. So, I think Patrick's really the only piece that you look at and you have a question about. Kirkpatrick, I'm fine with moving on from. Obviously, if you don't re-sign Kirkpatrick, you probably do need a veteran cornerback if you don't go get one in free agency. So then you bring back a Kirkpatrick or a Joseph in that kind of realm. But I just don't know if they're, like you said, priorities right now with what the team has.
And if we look to safeties, you've got both the safeties who were key special teams guys, Chris Banjo and Charles Washington. Washington, who was a big piece, Banjo, who played a lot of roles and ended up being being a starter for most of the year there at safety while Jalen Thompson was injured. I think both you can, especially if you end up bringing a different safety. And Chris Banjo was fine at safety, but I'm good with letting both of these guys walk because the type of thing, special teams oriented safeties, isn't that the sort of thing you can find all over the league? And honestly, Deontay Thompson should be that guy next year, the guy who is big on special teams and who can start at safety if needs be.
Well, and the other thing is that those are the positions you typically get in the 6th and 7th round in the draft, and then or in undrafted free agency. And so I just, with all of their needs on the team, I just don't see, like you said, a smart way to incorporate that into what they need as a team.
Zane Gonzalez on special teams. Again, special teams has major possible turnover. Zane Gonzalez, free agent. This is a tough one because in terms of talent, there aren't many kickers with more leg talent. Yet, now both he and Mike Nugent are free agents. I think Nugent is not a guy at age 38 who has the track record like when the Cardinals signed Phil Dawson, he had a track record of success. Nugent is a guy you sign like he did last year, and he fills in a few games and you feel good about him. Kickers are a strange thing. I'm actually okay with bringing back Zane Gonzalez. Don't pay him more than you paid him this year. Don't even pay him as much as you paid him this year. And then he and that kid Brett Maher, I don't know how you pronounce it, probably Maher, can battle for the job and have a real competition because Zane Gonzalez has not had real competition since he was here.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair way to look at it and go about it.
And then lastly, Andy Lee. What do you do at punter?
It's a fair question. Andy Lee's older. He still had a good net average. But I think, we're kind of seeing right now that you're able to find good young punters coming out consistently. Heck, the kid from ASU, Matt Turk, is a good little punter that looks like he could be a guy that plays in the NFL. So I would be, when you're cash strapped, Andy Lee's a very good player. He's a veteran. I just don't know if that's where you want to invest $4 million.
Right. And coming on next on the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web, we'll wrap this up with a little bit of talk of the postseason. What we want to see in the championship weekend and the Super Bowl. That's coming next on Rise of C-Red. Back on the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Playoffs over the weekend. Okay, we saw some good games. We saw probably the end of Drew Brees' career. Tom Brady still doing it, not looking great, but he's got a team that's stacked around him who can make plays defensively, offensively. You see Aaron Rodgers look great. And then in the AFC, it's, you got number 1 and number 2. You've got Patrick Mahomes, the Chiefs pulling off a win. The Browns almost pulled off the upset when we learned that anything is possible with Chad Henne. I know that was a stupid pun that we've seen all over social media. What were your biggest takeaways over the weekend with the divisional round?
I think that a lot of this weekend showed that the Cardinals are deficient offensively. You look at the guys, the final four teams. I wrote about it today, actually, on Tuesday. That the final four teams, they're all in the top five in offensive DVOA and Football Outsiders. Only one was in the top 10 defensively, Tampa Bay. So I think when you look at just how dynamic these offenses are, how multiple they are, how they're able to win, in different ways, with different personnel groups and different guys contributing. I just think it shows that, hey, this is, we've talked about it 100 times, but this is an offensive league. The league has geared it towards offense being king. Kansas City is, unreal when Patrick Mahomes is healthy. He got hurt and gave the Browns a little life, and then Kevin Stefanski decided finally to be a coward and punt. And I got it. I mean, you probably don't punt if Patrick Mahomes is still in there, but Chad Henney's in, so you take a chance and punt and trust your defense to get one stop on third and 14 against Chad Henney. It didn't work out, but and I think we're also seeing that the NFL is in good hands at quarterback. I mean, Josh Allen, obviously Mahomes is the best quarterback in the NFL, but I think you've got to be excited about these young guys and what they bring, as you're also seeing kind of the fade away of the greatest player of all time and Tom Brady.
And for me, one of my biggest takeaways was, what we saw from Baker Mayfield. Had he been given a chance, you just felt like he was going to win that game. And I think after a couple of years where his rookie season looked promising and a disappointed second year, and this year he was better, but they didn't ask him to do quite as much necessarily. I think we saw Baker Mayfield take a step up to become one of the really good young quarterbacks, and it was good to see Cleveland do what they did, and it's disappointed that they had to, but it's the same thing. They were supposed to lose. This was the Chiefs, and you would hate to see the defending champs go down because Patrick Mahomes went down, and then that's the reality of the NFL. But Mahomes, honestly, probably what the entire world wants to see is to see Mahomes versus Rodgers in the Super Bowl. Personally, I want to see Josh Allen and Tom Brady. I want to see the Bills because it's been so long, and I'm a big Tom Brady fan. I love seeing greatness, and I'd love to see him get one more ring at least, and especially since it would mean Bruce Arians and a lot of these former Cardinals would get a ring as well. I don't hold any animosity towards BA or any of that coaching staff, and I think it'd be fun to see. And I do love Tom Brady. I love greatness. As I've gotten older, I've grown to, even for players and teams that I have disliked in the past, the fact that I'm getting to witness a player like that, it's fun. And to be able to when I'm old, say, I watched Tom Brady play. He was the greatest. And these quarterbacks, they're not Tom Brady. He was something special.
Yeah, and it would be fun. I mean, you look at it. I think if Brady took down Rodgers and Mahomes in back-to-back weeks, what that would do, for his legacy. Not that he needs anything else for his legacy, but it's also fun to think about, like you said, the two best quarterbacks in this season in Aaron Rodgers and Patrick Mahomes facing off, and those offenses just putting on a show for us. That I think that would be a blast as well.
Oh, and the State Farm commercials. The State Farm commercials.
Right.
The Patrick Price and the Rodgers rates battling it out for the Super Bowl. It'd be ridiculous. Anyway, this weekend, I can't wait to see what happens. I'm hoping Patrick is healthy because Bills Chiefs, that's going to be exciting. I think there's intrigue with Packers Bucks. I'm predicting a Bills Bucks Super Bowl, but it doesn't feel like that Brady versus Rodgers is going to be excited because one, that Green Bay offense is just something else right now, plus playing in the cold and at Lambeau. I don't know what to expect from Tampa Bay, but Bills Chiefs, give me that every week, honestly.
Yeah, and I'm excited. I think we're gonna, as long as Mahomes is relatively healthy, I think you're gonna get a Rodgers and Mahomes Super Bowl, and Packers and Chiefs, and I think that's gonna be a great game.
And with that, we will wrap this edition up of the show. We'll be back in maybe next week, week after that. There's lots to talk about. There's some change with the Combine, so we'll have to kind of look up the off-season schedule moving forward. Thanks for listening as always. We'll be back again soon. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Enjoy the off-season. Muchas gracias and ciao. Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up, See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise up, See Red.